Serious? People who know murderers, were there any signs that something was off? If so, what were they?
I've posted about it before, but a kid down the street talked about killing squirrels for fun. He was 7-ish years old. He moved away and we forgot about. Years later we saw him in the news for brutally killing his parents.
I spent a lot of time at a friend's house when I was 6 to 9 years old. He had a brother who was like 3 years older than us, who I remember as being generally nice, but I have one weird memory of him absolutely losing his ass when he tried to teach me and his brother to rollerblade and I couldn't get it, like throwing things and weeping uncontrollably. When I was in high school, found out that he had joined the military, and while he was deployed he got court-martialed for killing civilians and keeping body parts, fingers, ears, as trophies.
Knew a girl as a freshman in college who was mean, obviously mentally unstable, and not too bright. When her fraternal twin sister fell in love with a good friend of mine, she became enraged with jealousy and could not let it go. Her sister begged her to get help and there was a huge blowout in a hallway on campus where my friend had to intervene to prevent his girlfriend from getting stabbed by her sister. The police were called to campus and she spent a week in jail before her sister decided to not press charges. Her remaining friends dropped out of her life because of her actions and unwillingness to get help. She got kicked out of college shortly after threatening the guidance counselor who was giving her one last chance and moved back in with her parents. When her sister went home for Christmas with my friend to introduce him to her parents, I told him to watch his back. They hadn't even made it all the way into the house before they were attacked and repeatedly stabbed. My friend died on the porch and she died at the hospital the next day. The murderer's sister was beaten to death in a jail fight. A few days met their older brother, who I didn't even know existed, at the funeral for the good sister. He said he had gone no contact with the family years before for his own protection because his parents refused to do anything about the mental health problems that his little sister always had, even as a small Derek. Miss you. I started college in the 80s. Time does heal, but rarely completely. Thank you for the condolences. Mental health resources were scarce and highly stigmatized back then, and I hope that anyone going through something similar gets the help they need.
I've met several after the fact, but this is about one I met weeks before. The then husband and I were hanging out and met up with a friend of his and the friend's girlfriend. The friend gets a call from his brother and invites him join us. The brother arrives and pretty soon afterwards, the whole vibe changed. My ex knew both men since all three were kids, so he was relaxed enough to start drinking around them. I was babysitting a wine cooler because I'm the next thing to a teetotaler and was the designated driver. I kept noticing the brother staring at me, but tried to ignore it, but it quickly became very uncomfortable. I'm nothing special to look at facially. I got the mom bod on lock and I was with my brother, then asks me why I'm not drinking. I explained that I'm not a real drinker and added that I like to be aware of who and what's around me. So he asked my husband why I wasn't drinking. I don't remember his response, but dude looks at me and says, "We need to get you." I left to go sit in the car, because was that I didn't feel safe or protected because my ex wasn't even paying attention. About 20 minutes later, dude walks up to my car and asks if I can take him to the corner store. I reminded him that he had a car and he replied that he couldn't drive because he'd been drinking. I told him I wouldn't take him, which led to us staring at each other in silence for several moments. He broke the silence by saying, "I bet you're real loyal." A loyal girl. A good girl. I know that, get anything you want from. Then he laughed and walked. I told my ex the next day. He wasn't bothered and was making excuses for the friend's brother's behavior. A few weeks later, there was a report on the news about the body of a woman being found in my ex's old neighborhood. Find out later she's been and murdered. It didn't take long to find and arrest her killer, aka the friend's brother.
I knew Christopher Bennett as a child. Honestly, I thought he was a bit of a, then again, most little boys are mean to little girls. Especially little girls who are 3 years younger than them and seem to think they can do whatever the boys are doing. Last time I saw him, we had grown up a little. I was 11, he was about 14. He wasn't as mean as I had remembered him. Did I see it coming? No, most people didn't. I mean, he was getting into trouble a lot, but never thought he had it in him. Then again, he was right to the he did, and I think a lot of other people would become murderers if they saw what he in 2003 he murdered his mother's boyfriend. He was 18 at the time. He broke into his mom's house with the intention of robbing the place. What he found was his little half-sister getting sexually abused by her father, Chris' mom's boyfriend. Chris ended up with one of a long prison sentence, 1,500 plus years, for ridding the world of a child molester. His sisters have since grown up and have been speaking out. They have been fighting to get their brother out of prison for a number of years.
For 4 years I worked 4 desks away from someone who was arrested and convicted of a 32-year-old cold case. Dude was in but didn't give off vibes. The general reaction was, I hope his replacement is less of a.
One of my uncles murdered his wife. He was out of jail by the time I was a kid. Yes, there was always something off about him. My mother told me he was always violent and had a sadistic streak. He liked to make people afraid. He mellowed out as he got older, but he was always a user and always looking to take advantage where he could. I'm pretty sure he was a sociopath. My mother had a lot of siblings and he was the only one like this.
One of my former co-workers decided to shoot a house all because a dog was barking in the backyard of a different house. Went on a shooting spree, killing the entire family except for the infant that was on the second floor. Only thing that was off was his drinking problem.
I knew someone who killed her, absolutely no warning at all. No hints to look back on and say we should have seen. It was a perfectly average suburban wife and mother who woke up one day and snapped. And ended up being featured on, currently serving out a 40-year term.
My former manager killed his wife and attempted to make it look like a suicide. He did this because he was ultra-religious and cheating on his wife with multiple women he found online. The church he was a member of frowned upon divorce, so he thought would be a better alternative. The story has been on Dateline and other shows. He was a super strange dude, and when I found out I wasn't completely surprised. His office always smelled like farts.
I know a guy who killed someone with a sword. A replica katana, but an actual sword. He'd always been weird and maladjusted, but never in a way that made anyone nervous. That a newspaper story about this guy for people wondering if it's a story they know already.
I worked for a guy that went to kick the guy's ass that was molesting his daughter. The molester pulled a gun, and in the fight my old boss killed him with his own gun. My boss served 6 years in Louisiana Penitentiary. Last I saw him he had full custody of his daughter.
A former coworker tried to his girlfriend and spent some time in prison for attempted. Got out, moved to Florida, and promptly murdered his new girlfriend. Dude was red flags up and down. Needlessly aggressive over small matters, insanely prideful, and willing to argue about basically any disagreement. None of the women I worked with were comfortable around him, and some straight up called him dangerous and wouldn't be in the same room as him. We worked an office job and he actually thumped his chest at me with his fists, yelling about seniority. He ate some of the first girlfriend's face while stabbing her in the chest multiple times. She tried to get him to be kept in prison, and to warn his new girlfriend, but he dismissed her as crazy, and blowing things out of proportion. He cut the second girlfriend's throat because he thought she danced with someone else.
Just out of high school I spent 8 months in Australia. Met a family that I became really close to. We hung out a lot and I worked for him. I liked the wife and kids more than the husband. He was very narcissistic and far too interested in his 13-year-old daughter's friends. He got caught cheating on his wife for the 2nd or 3rd time and, when the marriage was falling apart, described to his soon-to-be ex-wife how he could her and make it look like an accident. Couple years later he remarried, got caught cheating by the new wife. She wasn't as forgiving as the first wife and threatened divorce before she died, exactly as he had described how he would his ex. She, the ex-wife, called the police and they re-examined the accident, found the chunk of wood he hit her with before he loaded her in the car and pushing it over a cliff. Serving life in prison. Edit. He died of cancer in prison in 2017.
My dad would always tell me about the crazy things his work friend would say. Things like how he was going to push his wife down the stairs, or put rat poison in her food. I told my dad that these weren't normal things to say and he should contact the police or at least his HR, but he would defend it, saying that was just his sense of got arrested trying to hire a hitman to his wife, which ended up being a cop.
I delivered the baby of a 15-year-old girl and her maybe 17 to 18-year-old baby daddy, who I met a few times at prenatal visits. Greasy, but was actually quite polite. The girl behaved like a very young teenager, and weeks later, I got a call from the pediatrician taking care of the child. He told me that the baby was in the hospital with multiple fractures. My first, rather naive reaction was to assume the baby had undiagnosed osteogenesis imperfecta. The pediatrician straightened me out pretty quickly. I don't think there was anything that could have been done for the baby. Pretty sure the baby daddy was convicted.